So just shifting to takeaways, and I'm going to first start off with socializing the workplace-wide understanding of the internal work responsibility system that underlies health and safety regimes. So Aleks explained it that, essentially the duty is not unilaterally on the employer. Both supervisors and workers have responsibilities when it comes to mitigating hazards and risks and safety risks in the workplace. And it really behooves employers to ensure that they socialize, they make it clear that other workplace parties, including employees, have these responsibilities, because that's how you can leverage and gain buy-in, and just put it on them as well that they have to stick to the health and safety protocols and the new rules that are going to be in place and necessarily in place as workers return to work and to new work environments with different safety requirements. And also this is how employers can enforce and make it clear that you require employees to report in incidents as they arise, so that you can adjust your risk assessment, which Aleks referred to, and make sure that your measures, any incidents are addressed and your measures are adjusted as necessary. And the second takeaway is don't gloss over or shortchange the exercise of conducting a proper risk assessment. Aleks went through what constitutes a proper risk assessment. But you also want to ensure that when you conduct it, that you document the measures that you're implementing and why they're being implemented. Because if your measures, if the workplace is ever scrutinized, in terms of whether or not you've adequately protected the workplace or the employees from a health and safety perspective, you're going to have to pony up that documentation to show what you've implemented and why you've implemented based on your risk assessment. And just another point with respect to conducting a risk assessment, this should be monitored, it should be revised from time to time, it should be an evolving document and an evolving exercise that employers engage in.
And also on the list of takeaways is making sure you're communicating measures and responsibilities. And as Laura mentioned, employees are increasingly concerned and distrustful. And creating and revising policies in a proactive way that shows that the employer is on top of things and also communicating why the necessary measures are taken is really going to help ease that distrust. One of the things that the employer is going to want to do is consider putting together a specific return to work plan or protocol related to the pandemic. And this is something that we're going to have a specific session to discuss on day 2 of our seminar series here. Another key policy that you may need to create or revise is your health and safety policy. For example, you may need to add a work refusal section or add in specific measures with respect to hygiene and sanitization in the workplace, or perhaps consider whether you want a third-party reporting platform for things like workplace incidents or maybe symptoms, so that you can address those on a somewhat anonymous basis. You may also want to consider implementing workplace contact tracing. And we know, as Joel mentioned, that the government is looking at doing contact tracing to make sure that they can measure when somebody has tested positive for COVID-19, where they may have been and who they may have interacted with. But it's something that you're going to want to be able to do in your own workplace if somebody does test positive for COVID-19, to know what area of the workplace they worked in, or if they were client-facing and maybe went on deliveries, where they might have gone. Another policy, as we mentioned, is the WMIS policy that may need to be revised, perhaps the workers' compensation policy, policies related to leaves, given how many new leaves are in existence, and perhaps a more broad policy on infectious diseases that's going to cover some of the expectations that employers have related to this pandemic, but also any future infectious disease situations that you may deal with. And finally, employers should consider either creating or revising specific safety policies for client sites or when employees are engaging in public-facing work. And an additional part of making sure that you're communicating measures and responsibilities is making sure that you're continuing fulfilling your training obligations. And this may mean that you need to revise protocols and procedures, because as the workplace has changed, maybe how training needs to be conducted needs to change due to physical distancing requirements, for example. But you are still going to want to train on everything that you're legislatively obligated to, and you're going to want to train on the new policies that you're implementing. And part of demonstrating due diligence is going to be documenting what the training contained and who participated in the training. And this is going to include things like training on the internal responsibility system that both Laura and I have talked about. And also paying special attention to make sure that your frontline people leaders are trained on responsibilities and policies, because they're going to need to know, but they're also going to need to be the ones who answer questions from employees on a sort of first incident basis. An additional takeaway is ensure that your workers' compensation reporting requirements are met. As we mentioned, workers' compensation is an issue that's going to be relevant for employers navigating this. And in many jurisdictions where there is a workers' compensation claim, employers have 3 days or 72 hours to make sure that they're meeting their reporting requirements. And in more serious incidents, the reporting requirements are actually even shorter, because you may need to report immediately. So this is something that employers want to make sure that they keep on top of.
Okay, and finally and quickly, so we can answer some questions before we need to turn to the next segment. Employers have to ensure that they conduct work refusals in accordance with legal requirements. And, we've already hammered that point during the considerations. But one of the things that we've been advising clients as well is you may want to leverage the work refusal rules insofar as where employees cannot be convinced that the workplace is safe. You may want to preemptively, after you've gone through the steps in the legislation, bring in the Ministry of Labor as an external third party to sanction that the safety practices have been met and that the safety practices are solid and the workplace conditions are safe. And then, finally, with respect to leaves, we just want to remind as a takeaway to just assess all leave requests in good faith, considering legal obligations, because of course there are exposures as it relates to the duty to accommodate, being found to discriminate, or reprisal risks, specifically as some of the refusals may relate to mental health conditions. And we're going to spend some good time there on part 2 when we talk about accommodation.